Her hands won't stop shaking. The words, spoken by Decker, the opposing counsel, a man whose arrogance filled the room like cheap cologne, cut through the courtroom's hushed silence. He pointed a theatrical finger at me, and a few members of the jury offered him a cruel grin. I kept my eyes fixed on the swirling grain of the wooden table in front of me, focusing on the tremor in my own hands, willing them to be still. I felt my brother's gaze from the front row. My brother, Mark, the family's designated golden boy, who could turn disappointment into a public performance. "That's not how a soldier stands," he muttered, just loud enough for those around him to hear. The judgment was a physical weight, pressing down on my shoulders. Then, a sound, a sharp crack as the heavy doors at the back of the room were pushed open, followed by the slow, deliberate echo of polished boots on marble. It was the sound of command, a cadence that demanded attention. A full-bird colonel strode down the aisle, his Class A uniform a tapestry of honor and conflict, the ribbons on his chest telling stories I was forbidden to speak of. He didn't stop in the gallery. He walked with unnerving purpose directly to my table and stood at parade rest just behind me, a silent, immovable guardian. The entire room held its breath. The judge, a man I knew to be a veteran, saw the rank, the ribbons, the entire story written on the colonel's chest. And he rose to his feet. The memory of the deposition 2 months prior felt as sharp and sterile as the conference room it happened in. Mark was contesting our father's will, the one that left me the family home. His entire case was built on a single, poisonous idea that my stressful but minor government job had left me fragile, unstable, and unfit to manage an estate. During a break, I reached for a glass of water, and my hands betrayed me with their familiar tremor. Decker leaned back in his chair, a predator smelling blood. "Nervous, Dr. Thorne?" He oozed. "It's just a simple deposition. Can't imagine how you handle real pressure." Mark, ever the dutiful son, delivered the final blow. He looked at me with a practiced pity that was far crueler than anger. "Dad always said your compassion was a liability," he said, his voice soft. "He knew you weren't cut out for command decisions. It's why he wanted me to look after things." It wasn't just an insult. It was the echo of 1,000 other dismissals. A lifetime of being underestimated, now being used as a legal weapon to take my home. It was the moment I knew I had to stop absorbing the blows and start fighting back. He called the tremor in my hands a weakness. He had no idea that tremor was paid for in blood during a maskell incident north of the Hindu Kush. He thought he was questioning my stability. He had no idea he was slandering the chief of surgical operations for the 75th Ranger Regiment. To understand the reckoning that followed, you have to understand the 2 lives I was living. To them, I was always just Ari, a childhood nickname they refused to let go of, as if it could keep me small and simple forever. I remember one Sunday dinner perfectly. My father, a retired logistics officer who saw life as a series of managed assets, was beaming. He raised his glass to my brother. Mark had just closed some mid-level corporate deal, and he recounted the story with the breathless importance of a general winning a war, peppering his speech with words like synergy and leveraging platforms. My father soaked it all in, nodding with paternal pride. He saw his legacy in Mark's ambition, a tangible, understandable world of profits and losses. Later, when there was a lull, I tried to share a piece of my own world. I mentioned I had just passed a grueling certification for advanced trauma, life support, a qualification that had taken me months of relentless study. My father just patted my hand, his eyes already distant. "That's nice, honey," he said, the words a familiar, gentle anesthetic. "It's good you have a stable job at the hospital." In their minds, my life was a quiet, predictable thing. They pictured me in a starched white coat at a hospital in Virginia, shuffling papers and checking charts. A safe, respectable government job, far from any real danger. The tremor in my hands, They accepted my explanation of a training accident without a second thought, because it fit the tidy, harmless box they had built for me. That box was a lie. My reality wasn't sterile hallways and paperwork. It was the controlled chaos of a forward surgical team tent, smelling of antiseptic and churned earth, under the constant hum of generators. Just weeks before that dinner, I was standing in one. We had a maskal situation, a mass casualty event. The air was thick with tension and the metallic scent of blood. My patient was a young ranger, torn apart by an IED, his life slipping away with every beat of a heart that was failing. We were deep in the golden hour, that critical window where I could either pull him back or lose him forever. His monitor suddenly blared, a long, soul-crushing tone. He was flatlining. There was no panic. There was no room for it. My voice cut through the noise, clear and absolute. Push 2 units of ONEG, start the massive transfusion protocol, and get me a thoracotomy tray, now. The tremor in my hands, the one my family saw as a weakness, vanished. With a scalpel, my hands became what they were trained to be, steady, precise, and sure. I cracked his chest and held his life, quite literally, in my hands. The world narrowed to that single, desperate task. Later, after the chaos subsided and the Ranger was stabilized for evac, my commanding officer, Colonel Davies, found me. He was a man of few words, and every one of them landed with the weight of a medal. He just looked at me, his face etched with exhaustion and respect. "The kid's gonna make it, Thorne," he said. "That was your call. That was my world. A world of life or death calls, of earning respect through competence, not charisma. But I could never share it with them. My mother, Carol, a woman who believed family peace was more important than individual truth, had made that clear years ago. After I'd tried to explain the intensity of my work once, she'd pulled me aside, her voice a worried whisper. "You know how your father and Mark are," she'd said. "They live in a world of business and bottom lines. They don't understand your world. Just let them have their pride, Ari." Her plea was for me to shrink, to edit myself down to a version they could easily digest. And, for a long time, I did. I built a wall between my 2 lives, becoming a different person depending on who I was with. For years, I had compartmentalized. I was Ari, at home, and Colonel Thorne in the field. I kept my worlds separate to protect their fragile egos. But when they dragged my service, a service they didn't even understand, into a court of law to steal my home, they collapsed the firewall. They wanted a fight. They just didn't realize they were picking one in my arena, by my rules. After the deposition, I went back to my apartment. It's a sterile, orderly place where everything has a purpose, and for hours, I just sat in the silence. The hot, stinging anger from my brother's words had cooled into something else entirely, something dense and heavy like surgical steel. It was resolve. They had built their entire case on a perception of me as fragile and emotional. I realized I couldn't win by arguing against that perception. I had to shatter it. This wasn't going to be about revenge. It was going to be a paradigm correction, executed with clinical precision. My first move was to make a secure call to Major Jess O'Connell, a friend from a previous assignment and one of the sharpest JAG officers in the service. I laid out the situation for her, not as a wounded daughter, but as a commander assessing a threat. They're using my medical history and a fabricated narrative of instability as their primary weapon, I explained. They've stacked their witness list with people who will testify about my fragility. I need a character witness of my own, but testimony isn't the right tool. Jess was silent for a moment on the other end of the line, processing. Then she said the words that solidified the entire plan. "You don't need someone to talk, Eris. You need someone whose presence makes talking unnecessary." The strategy we devised was simple but brilliant. We would call my commanding officer, Colonel Davies, as a character witness. He wouldn't have to say a single word. His presence alone would be the testimony. Jess, with her expertise, handled the official channels. She drafted a formal request for the colonel's appearance, citing the need to protect a decorated officer's reputation from public slander during a civilian legal proceeding. It was a rare protocol, but under the circumstances, it was approved within days. The final step was the easiest. I called my civilian lawyer and gave him a single instruction: add the name Colonel Richard Davies to the witness list. No rank, no affiliation, no explanation. I knew my brother and his lawyer, Decker. They were blinded by their own arrogance, so certain of the weak little Ari they thought they were up against. They wouldn't bother with deep research on a name they didn't recognize. They would assume he was just another one of our father's old, retired friends from the VFW, someone they could easily dismiss. They were preparing for an emotional argument from a fragile woman. They had no idea they were about to walk into a tactical operation. The subpoena was sent. The trap was set. Mark and his lawyer saw a name on a piece of paper. They had no idea they were summoning a living testament to a world they couldn't even imagine. They were about to learn that in a courtroom, as on a battlefield, battles are won by controlling the terrain. The air in the courtroom was stale with lies. For hours, I had sat there, a silent effigy, while my brother and his witnesses chiseled away at my character, painting a portrait of an unstable, emotional wreck. They spoke of my episodes, my seclusion, my inability to cope with pressure. Each word was a careful, deliberate cut. Now, my brother Mark was on the stand for his final testimony, his face a mask of counterfeit concern. He looked at the jury, his voice thick with feigned sincerity. "I love my sister, I truly do," he began, "but my father knew she couldn't handle the pressure. He worried about her constantly. He saw her fragility." His lawyer, Decker, paced in front of the jury box like a caged tiger who had already tasted victory. He gestured toward me, his voice booming with theatrical pity. "Ladies and gentlemen, you've heard the testimony. You've seen the evidence with your own eyes," he said, pointing at my hands which, despite my best efforts, trembled in my lap. "This is not a person of sound mind. This is not a person fit to manage a complex estate." I felt the jury's eyes on me, a mixture of pity and contempt. I had become the fiction they had created. In that moment, I felt a deep, chilling isolation. It was the culmination of a lifetime of being misunderstood, of being minimized, now playing out on a public stage. Then my lawyer stood. His voice was calm and even, a stark contrast to the drama that had filled the room. "The defense calls Colonel Richard Davies." A small murmur rippled through the gallery, but nothing more. The name meant nothing to them. I saw Mark whisper something to Decker, who just shrugged, a dismissive smirk on his face. They were unconcerned. But then the heavy courtroom doors at the back swung open, and the atmosphere in the room didn't just shift. It fractured. Colonel Davies entered, and it was like the laws of physics had changed. His uniform was immaculate. His posture a ramrod of command authority. He didn't glance at the gallery or the jury. His eyes found me, and he began to walk down the central aisle with a purpose that silenced every whisper. He didn't walk to the witness stand. He strode directly to the defense table where I sat alone. The jury leaned forward, their confusion morphing into intense curiosity. My brother's confident smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. The colonel stopped directly behind my chair, standing at a perfect parade rest. The silence in the room became absolute, heavy and expectant. And that's when the judge, an older man I knew was an ex-Marine, leaned forward slightly. His eyes, sharpened by years on the bench and a lifetime of understanding protocol, scanned the colonel's uniform. I knew what he was seeing. The Ranger Regiment crest, the silver star, the Purple Heart, the combat medic badge. He was reading a story that my family had refused to learn. The judge's demeanor transformed instantly from judicial oversight to profound professional respect. Slowly, deliberately, he rose to his feet. Seeing the judge stand, a wave of confusion and instinct sent everyone else shuffling to their feet. The entire courtroom was now standing silent, watching this inexplicable scene unfold. I looked over at my brother. His face was a canvas of dawning horror. The color drained from his cheeks as he began to understand that he had made a catastrophic error. He had stepped into a world whose rules he did not know, and a master of that world had just entered the room. The colonel then leaned down, his voice low but clear enough for the court reporter's microphone to catch every syllable. "Steady, Lieutenant Colonel," he said. "You're relieved." The words hit the air like a sonic boom. Lieutenant Colonel, my rank, my reality, spoken aloud in the one place I was supposed to be powerless. My mother gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Mark's jaw hung open, his carefully constructed narrative of my fragility vaporizing in an instant. The colonel then faced the bench, gave the judge a curt, respectful nod, and turned back to me. In the ringing silence of the stunned courtroom, he executed a perfect, sharp salute. It wasn't a greeting. It was a formal, undeniable acknowledgement of my rank, my service, and my authority. An authority that clearly outstripped everyone's in the room, save for the judge. The jury was no longer looking at me. Their eyes were fixed on my brother and his lawyer, and their expressions had hardened from credulous pity into cold, undisguised contempt. They understood now. They had been lied to, manipulated, and made party to a profound injustice. Decker stood frozen, his planned closing argument dead on his lips. How could he argue I was unstable when a decorated combat commander was saluting me? How could he claim I was weak when my strength was being endorsed by a man who radiated it? The salute was more than a gesture. It was a verdict, and it had been delivered. My brother had used our father's name as a weapon his entire life, but in the end, it was my rank, earned in my own name, that leveled the field for good. The judge dismissed the case with prejudice less than 5 minutes after Colonel Davies made his salute. The gavel fell with a finality that echoed far beyond the courtroom walls. It wasn't just a legal victory. It was the end of a story my family had been writing for me my entire life. In the marble hallway outside, the air was thick with unspoken words. My brother, Mark, rushed toward me, his face a mess of confusion and desperation. "Ari," he stammered. "The name, a ghost from a life I no longer lived." "Ari, I didn't know." Before I could even think of what to say, Colonel Davies placed a firm, steadying hand on my shoulder. He didn't look at Mark. He simply guided me toward the exit, his presence a silent, impenetrable shield. I glanced back once. My mother, my brother, my father's legacy, they all stood there, looking small, and lost in the cavernous hall, isolated by an ignorance of their own making. The power dynamic had not just shifted, it had been permanently inverted. A year can change everything, or perhaps it can simply reveal what was always there. 1 year later, I stood on a podium in a state-of-the-art training facility. The title on the door behind me read, Director of Combat Medical Training. I was no longer just the surgeon in the tent. I was the one responsible for training the next generation of medics who would be. In front of me sat a class of new special operations candidates, their faces young, determined, and nervous. To make a point about resilience, I held my hands out for them all to see, letting the slight, persistent tremor show in the bright lecture hall lights. My voice was calm and strong, stripped of any shame. This, I told them, is not a weakness. It is a reminder. It is the cost of doing business, a receipt for a life saved under fire. It does not define your ability to perform. Your training does. Your focus does. Your will does. In that moment, the very thing my brother had used as a weapon against me became my most powerful teaching tool, a symbol not of fragility, but of survival and strength. After the lecture, I was surrounded by my colleagues and students. The air was filled with easy laughter and the shorthand of a shared, intense world. We talked about new tourniquet protocols, the challenges of high-altitude medicine, and the upcoming deployment schedules. They asked for my opinion, they valued my experience, and they respected my command. We shared the kind of dark humor that only makes sense to people who have seen the things we've seen. There was no performance here, no need to shrink myself to fit into a pre-made box. This was my tribe. This was my family. One forged not by blood or obligation, but by mutual respect and a shared mission in the crucible of conflict. They didn't need to be protected from my reality. They were my reality. Later that evening, while reviewing mission readiness reports in my office, my phone buzzed with an email notification. The sender was my mother. The subject line was simply, "Your father's house?" My heart didn't race. There was no dread, only a quiet curiosity. The message was short. It said that Mark's business had failed, and that he was finally seeking help for his issues. It spoke of regret and shame. It ended with the words, "I once would have given anything to hear. We were wrong, Aris. We are so proud of you." I read the words over once, then twice. The person I used to be would have felt a surge of validation, or perhaps anger that it had come so late. But now, I felt a sense of calm detachment, a quiet, peaceful closure. Their pride, their approval, it was no longer a currency I dealt in. I had found my own worth, in my own world. I took a slow breath, and I pressed archive. My attention was needed elsewhere, on the people who were depending on me now. My family believed a legacy was a name you were given. I learned a true legacy is the title you earn when no one is watching. If you've ever had to prove your worth to people who refuse to see it, share your story below. In this community, your expertise is always recognized.